Thank you. My name is Tim Schwanen. I'm Professor of Transport Studies and Geography at the School of Geography in the university, and I run the Transport Studies Unit, which is a social science research group that does a lot of work on questions of transport and infrastructure. I got 3 points to make, and I hope I'll get them done in the 3 minutes. Let me start by reinforcing some of the points that have been made by the previous speakers. One is that technological substitution is not enough. And with that I mean it's not enough to simply swap current vehicles with electric ones. We'll need to do much more. We've heard a lot about mode shift, cycling, walking, but we also need to think especially about freight, and that's my second point. The emphasis is usually on passenger transport. The real issues lie with freight and logistics, and particularly with online shopping very rapidly growing, we'll get much more delivery traffic in the city over the next couple of years. Another point is about capacity. There was a point that Llewellyn was making. What local government can do in this city is limited because of the way transport is set up. It is very much about commercial partners, and they do great work, but the fact that we're dependent on commercial partners slows things down compared to what you see in the European countries we tend to compare transport issues with, sort of the Netherlands, Germany, Copenhagen, and so on. And I think that is particularly important, again, as we've heard this morning. There's also the point about freight and freight consolidation, for instance, where you build centers on the fringe of the city, where you bring different operators together, and then you reorganize your what we call last mile delivery to different to the final destinations. That's absolutely a nightmare. Time and again, it doesn't work. And it's really, really difficult to get that done, but we'll need to get there some way. Stakeholders in this city work together very well, but it's not always easy. And again, you will have seen this morning, different interests, different things they want to get done. That again makes things not as easy as they could be. Second point I want to make is about thinking about emissions from transport, because we've been talking a lot about emissions within the city. That's very important, but if we think about transport and climate change, we need to think about this in a broader term, in a broader sense, because this city is critically dependent on the university and on tourism, both of which generate a lot of emissions that we don't readily see, because many people will fly in and out of the country, and that is creating huge levels of emissions that we don't usually take into account. And if we were to do what is known as consumption-based accounting of emissions, where you actually look at what is the emissions that are required to get a particular type of activity going, we'll see that the aviation sector is really, really important. So this means that questions about transport cannot simply be addressed by looking at transport. It's about the economic model that we as a city want for our future. So I think that's really something you need to think about next week. Final point is about people and transport systems. And that's a question, who do we design our transport systems for in this city? And I think that's really important to think about. And in that context, think about, for instance, the low-income, precarious workers, the people who come in and do the catering and the cleaning in my college, and who have to come often long distances because they cannot afford to live in the city, and they have to travel on bus services or on other services that do not, because their schedule doesn't fit within a 9-to-5 workday. They really have arduous journeys, and that's a real issue. Think also about children. Think about children with complex needs, autism spectrum, and so on and so forth. If we build systems that work for them, they work for most people in the city. Going further into the future, also think about elderly people. Think about people with dementia. Many of them will live in the community. They will have to move around as well. And I think these are very important issues, these social questions that we need to think about as well when we think about the environmental side of transport. Thank you.